Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 680. Each life converges to some center. Several of you have commented on the fact that it is amazing as we're doing this reading through all these poems of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. There aren't any weak poems. That each one of these poems seems to cover a topic in such a profound way that you could spend forever thinking and musing on any one of these poems. Certainly many of my students love this poem and the way in which this poem is going to resurrect the question of the goal. Now, notice the language even, the center, which will remind us of earlier she used the word essential, reminding us, of course, of Thoreau's Walden. I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately to front only the essential facts. Like, what is it that you build your life around? By the way, when this poem was published in 1891, it was actually titled The Goal. Obviously, Emily never titled any of her poems. It is another poem about motivation. Many will see this as another poem about writing. And a poet talking and writing about writing will be one of the ways we think about this poem, possibly. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. I'm hopeful you worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 679 poems. We just finished with 679, Conscious Am I in My Chamber. And if you've done that reading, you'll be able to place this poem within a larger context, which is one of the great things about reading all these poems in the order in which Johnson presents them. One scholar has called this poem a complex philosophical poem, and I think there's good reason for us to think of it that way. I want you to notice, though, how Emily moves, and this will not surprise us, from a certain statement of certainty about goals to something maybe less certain by the end. Also, I want you to pay attention to the use of the phrase, "it may be." She says it this way: each life converges to some center, expressed or still, exists in every human nature a goal. Embodied scarcely to itself, it may be too fair for credibility's presumptions to mar. Adored with caution as a brittle heaven to reach, where hopeless as the rainbow's raiment to touch. Yet, preserved toward sure for the distance, how high under the saints' slow diligence the sky, ungained it may be by a life's low venture, but then eternity enable the endeavoring again. Now, some have pointed out that Emily loves to play this game of playing with syntax. We'll even talk about a moment or two in the poem when we call it syntactic doubling, where it isn't clear whether the phrase is meant to emphasize what came before or what comes after. This is a brilliant poem on so many levels. We'll even hear a scholar or two talk about at level 2B all the games that she's playing. Notice, though, right away, the question is she talking about all lives or a specific life has some center? And of course, the use of the word converges ends with this notion of journey or traveling, and we do it again. This notion of the cyclical nature of our lives. Notice, each life, later it'll be every human nature, each life converges to some center. Now, I can't help but read this and think about her contemporary, Walt Whitman. We've given full lectures on every poem in Leaves of Grass. We call that series Talks with Walt. Do you guys remember when we did Song of Myself 48? There is no object so soft, but it is a hub for the wheeled universe. This notion that there's something right in the center of it all. To some center expressed or still. Now, I have made this argument that when you pick up the poetry of T.S. Eliot, let's just talk about four quartets. We've given full lectures on every line of four quartets at learnstrong.net, and I recommend it to you. At the still point of the turning world, right, you'll remember this, we must be still and still moving. I think that T.S. Eliot learned a lot about the use of the word still from his study of Emily Dickinson. She is brilliant with it. She'll use this word in 95 of her poems because it's so profound, right? I am still in room 303. That senses some notion of duration. And I am still, as in moving. She'll play the game. notice the center is something at the still point of the turning world, is the way that T.S. Eliot will say it in Bert Norton. And I think here it makes sense. Notice, each life converges to some center, expressed or still. In other words, you either say the goal out loud or you don't. In other words, quiet, still. Exists in every human nature. By the way, she uses this phrase in 12 of her poems, and I very much recommend that you maybe give some thought to it. And then she'll say it. A goal. Now, again, every life needs a goal. Every life needs something to aspire towards. For example, in our project here, we're aspiring to read all these poems of Emily Dickinson in the Johnson edition. 1,775 poems. Wow. Notice she says it's embodied scarcely to itself. It almost seems as if in the second stanza she's arguing that the goal is not necessarily fixed. Notice, it may be too fair for credibility's presumption to mar. By the way, this "it may be" phrase is what scholars will call syntactic doubling. The "it may be" phrase can refer to what came before, embodied scarcely to itself, it may be, or it may be too fair for credibility's presumption to mar. It's brilliant the way she sets it up. In other words, it may be that the goal is fluid, and in that regards, it's too fair or too beautiful for credibility's presumption. In other words, the believability to ever mar that goal. You'll remember mar when we come back to it again in poem 939. We're going to see it again in 1335, near the end of our study, when she'll say it this way. Again, 1335. Let me not mar that perfect dream by an auroral stain, but so adjust my daily night that it will come again. Not when we know the power cost, the garment of surprise was all our timid mother wore at home in paradise. Then in the third stanza, notice she goes from embodied to adored. She says a goal or a dream can be adored with caution, dash, as a brittle heaven. We're going to notice brittle and heaven both capitalized. So we're going to go from that to rainbow's raiment. Brittle heaven, you'll remember, we've said already that she uses the word heaven in 135 of her poems. You'll maybe remember brittle from 315, brittle nature. This idea that the goal can be brittle, right? To reach, and notice we go from reaching to touching. We're hopeless as the rainbow's raiment. I mean, we read this, and we're reminded Raymond of 473 and 542, but I can't help but think about Wordsworth's "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky." And of course, think about the power of the symbol of the rainbow, as Emily would understand it from her study of the King James Version of the Bible, and obviously the Genesis account of Noah and the rainbow. The rainbow representing, of course, God's promise as well in that story. In other words, it's impossible to ever touch the rainbow. Dreams and goals might be like that. The center might be like that. Notice the word "yet" for the next stanza. Preserved towards or persevered towards. This idea of perseveration is, of course, or keep going, goes with the last word again. Makes us immediately think of all the great epic poems and the journey motif. Everything from, of course, our Iliad, our Odyssey, our Aeneid, as well as, of course, Dante's Divine Commedia, and to some degree even Milton's Paradise Lost, all have that journey motif. That's so central, of course, to the Beowulf epic as well. We've given full lectures on all those titles at learnstrong.net. Persevered toward, dash, sure, dash, for the distance. It's only going to happen if one is capable of getting all the way to Ithaca, as we've often said. It's not the destination, it's the journey that matters. And then how high. Now, when we get to 1176, one of Emily's most famous poems, she'll say it this way: we never know how high we are till we are asked to rise. And then, if we are true to plan, our statures touch the skies. The heroism we recite would be a normal thing did not ourselves the cubits warp for fear to be a king. This notion of always challenging ourselves. I think for Emily as a poet, always challenging herself. There's a reason, guys, why these poems are so compelling. I mean, Emily felt this urge, this need to continue to push herself. Each poem she wants maybe to be just a little bit more profound. How high? Under the saints' slow diligence, the sky. Now, I think standing behind this is her favorite chapter, or favorite book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. You'll remember in Revelation 2:10, what? Be thou faithful unto death, and thou shalt receive the crown of life. I think this idea is that the saints yeah, they have to keep working to finally attain the goal. And obviously, the brittle heaven, it comes to mind again. Notice she says the goal, now to the final stanza, might be ungained. It's a brilliant way to say it, right? In other words, we don't make the mark. Notice again, it may be by a life's low venture. Notice we go from brittle to low venture. In other words, there's this notion that maybe you didn't choose high enough. Notice the juxtaposition of high to low. This poem is brilliant. But then, dash, eternity enable the endeavoring again. And again, this idea of a life might be a particular life or any life, all people's lives. It's not clear in this poem. But notice we can continue to endeavor. So notice all the E words of this poem. Each, expressed, exists, eternity, endeavor. And again, the last word of the poem takes us back to the idea of the circle itself. And the notion that there is a certain kind of repetition that happens in this poem. Now, what are we going to do at 2A here? Well, I think our argument is that striving gives purpose to human life. The idea that that we're always looking to try to improve in some way. By the way, it's been ascribed to St. Augustine, although it's not directly St. Augustine, although obviously he wrote about this idea. But the mystics had this idea that Emily might have been playing with, that, quote, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Again, Augustine has been credited with such a line. It's not yet found, but the sentiment for sure is there, no doubt about that. Now, there's a scholar named Ierolli, who we quoted before, who will point this out, quote, about this poem. The conclusion would be more convincing if the poet had not presented both goal and eternity as unattainable, as hopeless to reach, as it would a rainbow. If life is a process, continue now to make some observations. If life is a process governed by an end, both the nature of that end and its attainability remain in question. And then another scholar has pointed out this way: the formal elements of the poem reflect and reinforce this tension between goal and process, certainty and uncertainty, order and disorder. Although the poem has an iambic tendency, especially in the short lines, it lacks regular metrical pattern. Each stanza is built on the tension between alternating short lines. For example, a goal, too far, to mar, to reach, to touch, too high, the sky, but then, again. And the longer lines, many of which contain polysyllabic words, converges, embodies, credibilities, presumption, preserved, diligence, eternity, endeavoring. The long lines seem to reach out toward the goal, while the short ones pull back, imitating the halting, difficult process of the soul to some center. Wolsey also points out that by inverting the subject and complement, the poet's meaning sometimes hidden until the end of a stanza. For example, exists, a goal instead of a goal exists. And then Wolsey will continue. The prosody underscores the goal as that which governs process. It also underscores how tenuous relationships between goal and process can be. Syntactically, inverted complements lead to confusion as to the subject left behind. Conceptually, the significance of what has gone before depends entirely upon an end that remains beyond it, and that seems unknown, end quote. Of course, we've got all kinds of short E words at the beginning: expressed, exists, embodies, enabled, endeavoring, eternity, as well as in the middle, center, every, credibility, heaven, venture, then, again. The frequent EN and EV as well syllables. The long E in each, and eternity, and reach, and be, and that's another pattern as well. Notice the S and the D sounds, as we pointed out. Notice the rich sounds, the orchestration of the sounds is quite brilliant. At 3A, well, obviously the great epics come to mind. The journey and the striving towards the goal, the center. Obviously, we mentioned T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. Go back and read Burnt Norton and what we had to say about Burnt Norton after you've studied this poem. It'll blow your mind that although T.S. Eliot never credited Emily Dickinson with much of the stuff that he wrote in Four Quartets, I can't help but believe that in some ways he's responding to it. Obviously, we mentioned 1176 as well. We never know how high. Finally, at 3B, so what is the center that you think Emily is talking about? Is it deity? Is it God? Is it heaven? She calls it brittle heaven. Or is it something else, maybe a little more grounded for you, like trying to read and finish all these Emily Dickinson poems? By the way, because we're at 680, we only have 1,095 poems to go. Thank you.